Hello, friend. Welcome back. This is Heather. If you're new here, this is Heather, and this is KFUG's Community Square, where we have conversations with those in the community about whatever it is that you'd like to talk about. If you'd like to be a guest or bring up a topic on the Community Square, email communitysquare@kfuglp.org. And today we're going to talk with Jana Baker, who is the sister-in-law of Megan Postma. And for those who are not aware, Megan Postma is the victim of our assistant CAO, Randy Hooper, who was arrested and charged for a felony DUI hit and run in 2025. I think it was the day before Easter Sunday, leaving the casino. And so that case has been settled, and he is on work release currently out of Humboldt County. And Jana, you wanted to talk about the different things in the process and the things your sister-in-law went through. But I want to make it clear, where you are an attorney in Oregon, you are not an attorney in California, and this is in no way, shape, or form legal advice for anybody who is here, who is a victim, who is charged with a crime, or any of that other stuff, right?
Yes, that's correct. And then just everything I say is my own personal opinion, and no one else's perspective, just my personal opinion on the matters.
Okay, so you're not representing your law firm. You're just here. And I just wanted to make sure, if anybody kind of looks you up and stuff, that you are a lawyer, that you're not in California. You're not here as a lawyer. You're just here to talk about the case from your perspective and the effects it had on your family. So,
Yeah, that's
okay.
correct.
Okay, but I am going to ask you a little bit about the being a lawyer. Prior to
Yeah.
this conversation, we spoke on the phone, and you are currently a defense attorney, or you used to be a defense attorney?
Yes, I am currently a defense attorney, so I'm a partner at Hanson, McClintock, Gerber, and Baker. So my primary practice is criminal defense. I do some other areas of law as well, but that is the majority of my caseload.
Okay. So you're familiar with the processes, um, and what defense attorneys are and those types of things.
Yes, I'm familiar with, standard criminal procedure. Obviously, California's procedures and laws are different than Oregon's, and the rules of ethics that attorneys abide by are a little bit different. But I'm familiar with the national standards as well for things like that.
Okay. All right. So, what is it that you find different? I guess, what would be different about the way that this case was handled in Del Norte County versus Oregon? Is there a difference?
I think there is, and just to kind of give like some of my background of my experience, I was able to intern at Josephine County DA's office, so that's in Grants Pass, Oregon, and I clerked with a defense firm in Jackson County, so that's Medford, Oregon. I clerked at a post-conviction release firm in Marion County, and then I was a public defender in Marion County, so that's Salem, Oregon, for a few years before becoming a partner at my current firm. So I really have had the opportunity to kind of view the justice system from every angle, like prosecution, indigent defense, post-conviction private defense, and then currently in my current role, I get to work with victims and represent victims in some cases, so some victim advocacy as well. Um, and additionally, I've have been mentored by some of the top defense attorneys in the country. I'm on committees for the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers and the Oregon Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. And then I just want to say that because I have a very broad network that wasn't shocked when I tell them this story.
Okay, so so you have represented people who were accused of the crimes, the victims of the crimes. You have vast knowledge of the law, and everybody that you have talked to through all of those things is shocked. And I wanted to make sure that that's what I heard correctly. My phone was being weird.
Yes, they have just been shocked, and I'll say I've talked to some of my counterparts that are prosecutors here, I've talked to some friends that I went to law school with that are prosecutors. I've talked to defense counties, or no, excuse me, defense attorneys in my county, across my state, across the nation. Different friends just kind of saying like, "Hey, can you believe this whole situation?" And I start from the beginning to the end, and I haven't had a single reaction where it's like, "Yeah, that's normal." Even my friends in California, I've talked to about this case, and it's just shock. So I think to go back to your original question, I don't think this would happen anywhere else, really.
What shocks them the most, or what shocks them at
Uh,
all?
I think it's there's like all of it. I think there's like all these key points that I think we'll talk through today. But I think there's like because I think you really tell the story in fragments of how things unfolded, and I think there's like a shocking part kind of at every step of this process, if that makes sense.
Okay. So when I talked to Megan, I kind of used the Mad Hatter reference from Alice in Wonderland. So with you, can you start at the beginning and then at each step of the way tell us what was shocking about that? And then when you get to the end, stop.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Um, so I think it's important when we're starting at the beginning, kind of to talk about what was done right, because that was really what happened at the beginning. Um, and so I think, I just really want to give praise to the casino staff. And they recognize some concerning behavior. This is my own opinion based on reports I've read and testimony I've heard at the preliminary hearing, but Randy was kind of being like a creep at this concert and a nuisance essentially, and had to be told to like leave people alone, leave the table. Um, you know, so I think they handled that well. They had a conversation with them. They tried to fix that issue, and then they noticed this increasing level of intoxication. The casino staff tries to stop him from driving. They call a taxi. They're doing everything in their power, and so I think they genuinely appeared concerned about public safety in their community, and they did everything they reasonably could to prevent this from happening. So I just wanted to make sure I highlight that and say, I'm really impressed by the way that they tried to handle the situation.
Yeah. And I used to be an employee of Elk Valley Rancheria. I was the general manager of the bowling alley, and the amount of training that I received as the general manager, and the amount of training our staff received from state programs to from like over serving and how to deal with somebody who was in that situation and everything else. They invest a lot in that training for their staff and their employees. So I thanked Megan for acknowledging this. I live close to the casino, and I am grateful that they do everything in their power to ensure that things like this, um, the harm of it is reduced. I feel safe living here, knowing that they're out there watching out, making sure these things don't happen, and then the procedure, right? They immediately called 911. I apologize, Jana. That we've got the audio issue fixed here. So if you want to go ahead and continue.
Yes, I was just going to say I wasn't aware of the training that the casino does, but I will say that I think the way that the staff intervened and tried de-escalation tactics, it's very apparent from all those actions, the amount of training that they do put in to their staff.
Well, thank you so very much for that. That they really are great people. From the tribal council to the rancheria staff to the casino staff to Stacy McLaughlin, who is the current, I believe he's still the general manager over there. Yeah, they're just great people. So thank you for acknowledging that there was something that was done right in all of this.
Yeah, and to continue that conversation, I think California Highway Patrol also did a great job. They preserved evidence appropriately. They took the investigation seriously. They handled the scene professionally. In my opinion, CHP and the casino were the two entities that handled this case most appropriately. I'm not sure if Megan had said this in her interview. I don't remember, but I know we've talked about that. Had CHP not been involved, we don't even know that this would have been a conversation we're having today.
You okay? I don't want to jump ahead, but you genuinely don't think you think the CHP kept everything. I don't even know how to phrase that. You think, just so that I understand this correctly, you think that the CHP kept it ethical, or investigated it properly or fully, and you don't think that anyone else would have.
Yeah, that's correct. I am not confident based on, and I have a very limited experience. It's my own experience with your county, the county there. But based on what I've seen in this case, I am not confident that there would have been a case had CHP not been involved.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, that stems back to, and this is again jumping ahead, and I think we'll circle back to it possibly, but even at the casino, when they're saying they're going to call police, like Randy makes statements. The testimony was provided at that prelim hearing where he's saying, go ahead and call the sheriff. Like, they're all my friends kind of thing. And so I think that just, that makes me not feel confident that it would have been handled appropriately, in my opinion.
Okay.
But so this conversation isn't about attacking everybody involved. It's about identifying where the system failed after the investigation was done. And kind of to go through that, I know you and Megan talked really extensively about the facts of what happened. So I don't want to go through all of that again, but just to reiterate, it's my opinion that it wasn't just an accident. Randy made a series of deliberate choices. He chose to drive drunk. There were alternative options available to him. He ignored those intervention attempts. And after he hit Megan, he didn't stop. He didn't get out. He didn't tell her, hey, I'm just going to pull over. He drove away. And the only thing that stopped him was that his car became disabled. And Megan was left there and had to chase him. And she never stopped fighting since that moment. So it wasn't one bad moment. It was a series of conscious decisions on his part. And so, yeah, I think just making sure, to recognize it wasn't just an accident. It was a series of choices that led to a really unfortunate circumstance.
Yeah, that was one of the things I asked Megan was, right, is it really an accident when you commit a crime? And that was what committing a crime was her response. And I don't know. That's what we call them. They're car accidents. So regardless of whether it's criminal or not, we refer to them all as accidents. But it poses a very interesting question. And again, I agree. It's not really an accident if you choose to do it. I don't know. What do we call it? A mistake? I mean, clearly it was a mistake, but I genuinely don't know.
Yeah.
The language here.
I mean, if we want to get legal and talk about legal definitions, it's beyond an accident at this point, right? There is a conviction in place. He was convicted of drinking and driving. And kind of what makes something different from an accident to a criminal act is that mental state that accompanies it. So to have a crime, you have to have what's called actus reus and mens rea. The actus reus is the act, the criminal act, and the mens rea is your mental state. And there's all kinds of mental states, but whether it be reckless, intentional, negligent, all of those are different types of mental states. And so when we get into, the DUI aspect of it, it was criminal. The hitting her car was a consequence of that criminal conduct.
Okay. And so I don't remember because he took a plea deal, what the plea deal he was for, but I think it's just for one of the things. So he didn't take a misdemeanor charge for the hit and run. He accepted the misdemeanor for the DUI. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So that's where I'm being very specific and intentional with my phrasing, where, he is not convicted of a hit and run. That's absolutely correct. He is convicted of driving while under the influence, and him hitting Megan's car was a consequence of that criminal conduct.
Okay. But he was charged with felony DUI and felony hit and run.
Yes, that's correct. That was what his initial charge was.
Okay.
And in all of this, the one thing I really want to make sure that doesn't get lost is Megan. I think one of the saddest parts, I think, of all of this was Megan's love for Crescent City. That was her happy place. I think she told you that she honeymooned there. I've spent a lot of things. Some of my favorite memories are just Megan calling me on a random morning and saying, hey, do you want to go to Crescent City and go to the farmer's market? And we just make a drive out so we can go and get some of the things she likes at the farmer's market, and then we go back to Grants Pass. Beyond that, she loves like paddleboarding and going on family trips and going to Disneyland. They had actually bought, her and my brother had bought Disneyland season passes, I think like the month or two prior to this incident. And then because of the result of this incident, they had only actually got to use those passes like one time because she was in so much pain they couldn't go. And so it's really unfortunate, like all these things that she loves to do, she's not able to do. And she talked to you about her sobriety before this. And, she lost her job, there's the physical pain, but I think it's just so important to remember that Randy didn't just injure Megan physically, but he changed the way that she actually experiences places, safety in her life, and took away something really special, and that was her love for Crescent City, which holds a lot of painful memories for her now.
I'm truly sorry about that. I don't I don't have the language to express how that feels when I hear those things. That somebody who loved visiting, that somebody who's our neighbor in Joseph, because I go to Josephine County all the time and visit family, and we shop and go to the doctors in Josephine and Jackson County, and right, I couldn't imagine losing that connection, and then to hear that your family now um, doesn't feel the same way about my neighbors and I because of one person's actions. And then from talking with you and hearing you today, you don't view it as just one person's actions. You view it as the legal process here. And you
Yes.
okay. And just to go back a little bit, you had talked about how you talked to attorney friends of yours and people that you know, even in California, so California lawyers, and that this wouldn't happen anywhere outside of Del Norte County. What
And
what is that wouldn't happen? A plea like this wouldn't happen, or
um, so again, I think it's like I said, we tell the story in parts, and so it's kind of like as I tell the story to my friends, it starts with like sections, and it starts with like I think the preliminary hearing is a great place to start with that, and it's I will say about all of this, it's super disappointing because Megan feared from the beginning that this was a small town. There's a lot of political influence. Maybe like a backdoor resolution would happen. There are lots of comments on the initial like Facebook post that came out about the news article of this, of saying, like there's not going to be justice. It's just like a lot of comments kind of indicating that the town is corrupt or things like that. And I told her, trust the system. Like our system absolutely has its failures and its flaws, but it does work, and I've seen it work. And I've had to really eat those words over and over again. And I think that starts with the preliminary hearing. And I think like the defense's theme overall for that hearing was that Randy's a good person who made a mistake. You can read back the transcript from that hearing, and Mr. Mavris uses the fact that the sitting sheriff wrote a letter, the former sheriff wrote a letter, and essentially saying that Randy's a good person who just made a mistake, and he emphasized Randy's reputation and standing while using those letters from the sheriffs. And I think it's like really wild when you step back and look at like Megan and Randy have such similar lives where they're both active in their communities, both work for their counties, both otherwise law-abiding citizens, both respected people. And Megan's been open about her past struggles with alcohol, but the difference is she never chose to drive drunk and hurt somebody. And I would say that the biggest thing is that at some point accountability has to matter more than status, reputation, or community relationships. And I think that's one of the biggest failures and one of the biggest shocks here. So I think to answer your question, that the biggest shock is that the sitting sheriff wrote a letter and a former sheriff wrote a letter and the board of supervisors all wrote letters about a criminal case that was still pending, that facts had not been released about in support of a person they didn't know the full story yet. That's the first piece that shocks people.
so the preliminary hearing is the first hearing. So even before the facts were presented, the judges heard them or anything else. these people wrote those letters. Sheriff Scott came right out and was just like, "That's not what that letter was intended for. Um, that's not what I was like a character reference to be used at sentencing." But again, he wrote it prior to knowing all of the facts and the information. It's my understanding, as he made that letter public and he has written his op-ed and published that, um, that he wouldn't do that again. Like he's wouldn't do that again. So, but I don't. I mean, I could just be reading that into it, but again, because it's a small town and we're all interconnected. Um, but that's my understanding of that. But yeah, I was surprised too when I was sitting there in court and I heard that. And the former sheriff that wrote the letter, I do believe, is Supervisor Dean Wilson, um, that also wrote a letter.
Yeah, and and I've looked at those letters, and like the current sheriff didn't at all say, I'm writing this as a sheriff, or at all say who he was. And I think it's a small community. Everybody knows who the sheriff is in that community. Me as an outsider sitting in that hearing, um, if Mr. Mavericks would have just said, I think is his name Garrett Scott. Is that the sheriff's name?
Yeah, Garrett Scott.
Okay, so if he would have just said Garrett Scott wrote this letter, I would have had no idea, right? But he intentionally used those words of the sitting sheriff. That's how he phrased it, because that's the only way I knew that that was the sitting sheriff.
Yeah,
And I learned that in that hearing. And so whether or not he wrote it intentionally to be used that way, that's the way it was used. And as an elected official, every action you take represents that title. Just like as an attorney, as a barred attorney of Oregon, my actions I take represent that title, and there's consequences for actions I take, whether within work or outside of work.
I agree. Um, I guess it's just a slight difference of I view it as a rookie mistake from a politician in a small community that was just like, yeah, I get where you're coming from, kind of a thing. Um, and they you screw up and you do better the next time. I genuinely don't think that after this our politicians will be writing reference letters anymore.
And I hope not. And that's, I think, I don't want to put words in Megan's mouth. But I think, like, from my own perspective and based on my conversations with Megan, I think the one hope that we have is that this is a learning process, right? And everybody can just become better from this and move on. And so that is something I hope that they all walk away with this of, it's like, hey, maybe we should like really understand a situation before we involve ourselves and just write a letter because this guy works for the county and we know him.
Right. So I talked with Sheriff Scott, had a conversation with him, and I asked him those things too. And I was like, who else would get this? And he's like, well, he has influence. And so it's just like, so what I'm hearing you say is that if you have influence, you get this. And if you don't have influence, you get another thing. And he's like, that's not what I'm saying. And so we kind of had a bit of a back and forth on what that means. But I agree. I was beyond shocked when I heard that in court that day, that
Yeah.
that they had written these letters, and it just filled my mind with all of these questions and all of these doubts of all of these people, that we trust to provide good leadership in our community. But I'm also still willing, right? Because these are my neighbors. It's a small town. Our
Mm-hmm.
mayor is a school teacher, so it's not like we have these professional politicians here. I'm still
Right.
willing to accept that it was a mistake, and that's not a mistake they'll repeat again. God only knows. I mean, well, God does know, but how many mistakes that I've made and just been like, well, I won't do that again. So
Mm-hmm.
it's easier for me, I guess, to give grace because it doesn't emotionally affect me. And like you said, it's altered Megan's life. This decision that day to walk
Mm-hmm.
past a cab altered your sister in law's life. And I can't imagine what that's like for her or for you to watch, um, and deal with emotionally. Um, how are you doing with this?
Yeah, it's been, like, I wrote a letter to the court on her behalf because Megan's just one of the strongest people that I know. Um, she could literally have a bone hanging out of her leg and she would be like, I'm fine. Don't worry about me. Let me help you move the cabinet. And I'm like, no, like, let's go get your bone fixed, you know? She's just so tough and so strong. Just kind of like a little side special note. We went rafting. She went rafting with a bunch of my friends and I, and, the raft kind of got stuck on this rock, and she just like jumps out at some point and is, trying to get the raft out. And, then all of a sudden we're like going back down the river, and she runs and like jumps back into the raft. And I'm like, please don't ever do that again. Like, my brother will be so upset if I let something happen to you. But she's just such a strong, amazing woman. And I think it's so hard to watch her be like vulnerable over the last year, to be reclusive and not present like with the family as much. And I've definitely watched like this recovery process, and have watched her have to be on like painkillers and stuff for pain, and just be like out of it and adjusting and trying to find this regimen that will work for her. And still, every time I talk to her, she's like, oh, I'm going to the doctor, or like all of these things. And I'll say like, so in that letter I wrote that I woke up Easter morning to like two missed calls, I think, from my brother. I think I woke up at 7, and so they were at maybe like 5 or 6 in between that time, and he doesn't call me usually. And so I just knew something was wrong. And I could hear it in his voice when I called him. And so I was like, is she okay? And he's like, well, I mean, she's alive. And that just like made my heart sink, because it's like, I mean, it's kind of like one of those things where you're like, define okay, right? Like, she's alive, but is she okay? Like, and she wasn't. And so even, this past Easter passed, and it was just really sad. Like, Easter, I think, will hold that memory for her. Kind of like, last Easter morning, she was in the hospital for this. And so that's something that you just kind of think about on that holiday now, that, and I think that sucks. And even there's like just little struggles that you don't even think about. When I moved from the East Coast back to the West Coast after my first year of law school, Megan flew to the East Coast with me, packed my apartment in a weekend, and was like just such a huge support. And I'm moving this weekend, and it's something that just Megan can't come and be there for. And it's just those little things that get impacted you don't think about.
Yeah. I mean, because those are huge things, and those are the things that we do to
Mm-hmm.
support family and all of those other things. Um, and I don't mean to seem insensitive when I say this. Um, but like Randy has gone out and said how embarrassed he is by this process and by all of the things that have happened. And you're saying about what Megan has lost. But at one point in time here, like, she needed help to use the bathroom and to wipe
Mm-hmm.
and to do basic personal hygiene. And I can't imagine, don't ever want to experience that where I need that assistance from somebody else, and how embarrassed and humiliated I would be. So when you were talking earlier about the comparison of like they both work for their county, they both do this, um, she has had just as much embarrassment and humiliation in her for her own personal things. She's lost her job. She's had 2 surgeries. Um, all of these other things, and I think um, for me, that's where the emotion part comes from, is having sat in
Mm-hmm.
court and never watched a case like that before, and hearing those things, and just the compassion for her,
Yeah.
for
and
you.
and I yeah, and I think that is the saddest part. And it's I think anybody is embarrassed when they can't wipe themselves or put themselves their hair in a ponytail. And I think when you kind of step back, it's humiliating and embarrassing as it is to ask your spouse to help you with those things. Like, it's even more so when Megan, because she's just not the person that lets people help her. Um, she's not a person that asks for help. She's so strong. And so for her to be in that vulnerable situation, I just can't even like begin to understand what that would look like for her, because of how strong she is.
Is she and you as well, are you taking advantage of the programs and things from our victim witness for counseling, for support, and those types of things, or does that not cross the state line?
um, I want to come back to that. definitely, because that's, I think, another failure that I want to get into of this process is the victim's advocate, but they actually haven't talked to her at all since sentencing. They never called her after, and she has not heard a word from their office. So the short answer would be no. But I do want to come back to that, because I do want to tell the story like in the sequence of events. And
Okay.
so we were talking about like the sheriff's letter being used at that preliminary hearing, and the last thing I kind of want to say about that is, I think the community should remember, and I'm gonna say, like, I don't think that there was any ill intention on anybody's part. I think that there is this colleague people work with, and they're like, of course he's such a good guy, and I hope what's learned from that is maybe like wait until facts are out, because like just the appearance of the impropriety is enough. Everybody keeps saying he didn't get any special treatment, but the arguments themselves created that appearance of special treatment from the sheriff's letters, endorsements, the emphasis on his reputation, like the procedural attention. And I just want the community to remember that most defendants don't walk into a courtroom with elected officials publicly advocating on their behalf. And, keep that in mind and hold those officials accountable if it does ever happen again.
Yeah. I'm right. So if we were going to accept the mistake one time, it's not a mistake if they do it a second time.
Right. And to the elected officials, I hope that they learn from this. I mean, specifically, I think we'll go through some more of like the preliminary hearing as it happened, but the most specific thing that I remember is it was a really interesting perspective too, because the defense side of things, we kind of know what's going to happen at trial, right? We know all the evidence coming, where the state has to tell us exhibits beforehand and discover those to us. So sitting in that hearing, I was kind of like on the victim side, where the district attorney doesn't represent a victim. And so they're kind of in this weird, like, in between phase where their interests have to be represented, but then they're not at the same time. But they played the video of, Randy Hooper walking out of the casino. They're escorting him out. They're trying to get him a taxi. He declines and keeps walking. He walks to his vehicle, and then he turns and he pees on the tire of the vehicle next to him. And Megan and I had no idea that happened,
Yeah.
until we were sitting in court. Like, I will tell you, my degree is in criminal justice. I am a true lover of true crime. Like in fifth grade, I was literally tearing apart cases, reading Discovery online. Like, it's just wild. So at this point, I am so desensitized to things, and not many things shock me. And I will tell you, when I saw that video, my jaw was on the floor.
Yeah. Same. Same. I
And yeah,
I could. We all kind of know that when you're drunk, you lose your inhibitions, but you don't become a somebody that you're not. So that was shocking to see from somebody that, again, I don't know personally, but have interacted with and things, and would have never realized that that was a part of their personality.
well, and even when you think about it, it's one thing to like pee outside, right? But he could have peed on his own tire.
Or
Like, but he
right?
chose to turn. Yeah, he could have went inside. Like, that's the ultimate best choice. But if you're gonna pee outside, pee on your own car. He like specifically turned to the car next to it to pee on their tire. Like, that to me just says so much about the personality there, right? Um, and so I just remember sitting in that hearing though, and then hearing that the sitting sheriff had written a letter, and that video and that incident that he peed on someone's tire wasn't public. And I was like, I would be so embarrassed right now if I was any of these people that wrote a letter for him. Like, how embarrassing.
Right. And again, it goes back to they didn't know the evidence, because I don't know that they still know to this day that that's what he did. We didn't cover that in the news division of KFUG. And even Megan, when she spoke about it, she was still trying to protect him and preserve his dignity. Um, and you're just like, this is the evidence. And I don't know if that's because you're a lawyer and you have that within you. And the rest of us, right, as women, we're taught to not talk about those things and to protect men and other people's dignity. So it's a weird dynamic. I feel it's a weird dynamic.
Yeah, it is such a weird dynamic. And for me, I think that is something that should be mean, it happened in a public hearing, right? Like that video was played in a public hearing. It's not something that's private. It is public record now. Anybody can make a FOIA request on that. Um, and it is what it is, and I think it's a huge part of this case.
Why do you
I
think
mean,
it's a huge part of the case? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
I was gonna say maybe not like to the facts, but I think for me it just shows just like the state he's in, right? Like how intoxicated he was, and just like the complete disregard for anybody but himself. I think is what that shows, and that's why it's so big to me.
So when you said that you shared information with colleagues, I will just call them colleagues, whether they were in
Yeah,
Oregon or in California, was that shocking to them too, or did they just be like, "Yeah, that's what people do"?
no, it was absolutely shocking, and they're like, I cannot believe that. Um, and like it's just shocking. I think it's not something you see every day, especially when it is a county official involved.
Yeah,
Um, I I mean DUIs have their DUIs are like a really weird crime to litigate because it's such a torn path because most people have had at least a drink or two and driven in their life at some point or more, and have made that mistake. And especially I've worked on a lot of like DUI manslaughter cases, and it's such a hard thing because the families are so upset. And one of my first sentencings I was ever a part of, one of the son of the victim just said, like I have done this so many times, and for whatever, God blessed me with not having the same mistake of taking a life, and I don't know why I'm lucky and you're not. And that just has always stuck with me because I think about that whenever we talk about a DUI, and so that's why I want to like say specifically this case is, it's more than just the drinking and driving, because I think, that does happen. It's all these deliberate choices before and after as well.
and you mean like leaving?
Yeah, leaving. Like he was tried to stop, and they tried to stop him. To me, it's like he had said he went from another bar to the casino. He came from a bar. He was driving around, I think, in Brookings. So he drove from Brookings to the casino. I believe he lives like far away from the casino, not even close. So like you're always planning to drive home drunk at that point.
I didn't realize he was in Brookings. I thought he had left from the Porter Pines in the harbor and went to the casino. But I don't have the
Uh,
case in front of me, so I don't know.
and I could be misspeaking. I don't know the area as well, so I thought one of the areas was in Brookings from what somebody said. I could be completely wrong. I don't know places, but at any point he drove from one bar to the casino, and then my question would have just been like, how was he planning to get home that whole time? It's the night before Easter. Um,
Yeah,
I don't get it.
right. I
it
don't. Again. I was just as shocked, apparently, as you were sitting there. I just don't have your legal background to have heard lots of these cases to understand how shocking that actually was. All of it. I'd never followed a case that way and been to the preliminary hearings and seen evidence presented like that. Um, it was again. It was just. It's just horrifying. I don't know what the words are here.
Yeah, and I think like the point of why it's so shocking is to full circle come back to where I was going with that. Also, it's just with DUIs they're horrific a lot of the time, and there's so much stuff, but there's not usually a video of somebody exiting the place they are, dropping his pants, or didn't drop them, but like pull like urinates on the car next to them,
Yeah, right.
and
Walking past a cab
while
to
it's on
do it.
video. Yes, walking past a cab, um, walking to your vehicle and then turning to the vehicle next to yours and peeing on a tire like a dog. That's just not something you get. Maybe we might know that happened, but to have it on video and a very clear surveillance video of that is shocking.
Yeah.
And so I would have just been embarrassed not knowing the facts of what had happened and writing a letter before knowing all those things.
Well, if they weren't embarrassed before, I think they are now about writing the letter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
And then yeah, go ahead.
oh no, you go ahead.
I was just going to move on. Still within the preliminary hearing, I think those are like some of the pieces, and I think they'll be brought up throughout as I want to talk about that hearing. But I think one of the biggest things that also shocks people are like the failures of the district attorney's office. The first being that, everybody loves to say there is the attorney general's case handled this. And
Yeah, that
so, yeah,
so you're going to break that down for us, because that's what we were told, is the attorney general's office was going to prosecute this case because of his position, authority, and sway, for lack of a better word. I mean, he controls the prosecutor's budget and the sheriff's office budget,
yeah,
so that makes sense.
yeah. Right. And when I say that part, right, like, oh, the attorney general's office handled it, all of my colleagues that have heard this story are with me at that point. They're like, yeah, that's appropriate. That's what I would expect. And I'm like, but guess who from the attorney general's office handled it? And they're like, I don't know who. And I'm like, a local prosecutor who just billed hours to the attorney general. And they're like, wait, what? Wait. And I like have to repeat it to them because it is so bizarre.
It
Um,
is. It is
and
bizarre.
I did listen to your interview this morning on my way to work, actually, with Sheriff Scott, and so I know some of that was kind of like discussed, and I I think it's just so interesting because I think I don't know if it was in that or one of the statements I had read, but at some point I had there was a statement made about like, well, the attorney general's office reviewed the case, so I'm assuming this was appropriate offer. And I'll just say that I have not seen any evidence or heard any kind of assertion that the attorney general's office actually reviewed this case or was involved in this case anyway. I know Megan reached out to the attorney general's office directly, to their victims advocates directly, and had never heard back.
So
And
we
I
have
think that's a
no
major
idea.
failure.
Okay. On a
Yeah,
failure on our state attorney general's office, or a failure on Keith Morris to make sure that he had the documentation that our state attorney general's office did authorize it.
I think both, and maybe he has that information. I don't know. It hasn't been provided to anybody that I'm aware of. The only thing that I've heard for certain is that the bill went to the attorney general's office, that they paid for it, not Delaware County. And I think it's especially when you get into the ethics of things and um, conflicts and like the reason of why the district attorney's office had to recuse themselves. You get into like the nitty gritty of that. It just because you have like somebody else pay the bill doesn't resolve that issue of why you recuse yourself.
But it really
It is
doesn't.
it's a piece of it because sure, the defendant is managing the budget of that office, but like that person is still in that office. So he's not paying to be prosecuted with the budget he manages, but it's still an employee of that office that handled it.
Right. And again, he's the assistant CAO. So he and Neil Lopez, our CAO, the county CAO, oversee the budget process for all of our departments. So the probation department, which got sent out of county, the prosecutor's
Mm-hmm.
office, which should have had a prosecutor from outside of the county, and our sheriff's office, which sent Randy out of the county after he was sentenced.
Yeah,
So
and I think it's bizarre. And again, I've talked to this case about with so many of my colleagues now, and I have not had a single person wherever they practice just agree and be like, no, that seems right. Everybody is like, wait, what? That is generally the response I get after I say who from the attorney general's office handled
yeah, and it's
it.
again, he ran for judge against Judge Olson, and obviously I called her
Yeah.
Judge Olson, so Judge Olson won. And so
Hmm.
it's my understanding, because our local DA um, will not be running for office again. And again, I don't know that he's declared that he's running for the local DA for the to be the lead prosecutor here in Del Norte County, or it's just assumption on all of our parts. But that is the assumption, is that he'll run for that position and he's the one prosecuting the case. It doesn't, like I said to Sheriff Scott, it just feels icky. All of it just doesn't look good, and we were trying to avoid the appearance of impropriety, of favoritism, and all of those other things. And it's just kind of like we half-assed it.
Yeah. And I think I have this written down to like say it another, like, because I made some notes of kind of just what I wanted to cover, but it was, only the only time that the county actually cared about making sure there like was no real favoritism is when it only benefited Randy, in my opinion. And I can elaborate that a little bit more once we get to like the sentencing portion of everything. But
Yeah.
I'll say, yeah,
It does
um,
look that way, and you phrased it
yeah,
perfectly, and I guess that's what everybody in the community is trying to say, is that if it
mhm,
benefited Randy, then it was utilized, and if it didn't, then we'll just let it go.
yeah, and yeah, I have some like notes, like I said, once we get to like the sentencing portion where I want to talk about that more for sure. But I think the fact that Keith Morrison is running for district attorney,
I don't know that he is.
I'm not sure if
We're
he's
assuming he's
okay.
going to when DA Mix's term is up because she will not be running again. That's an assumption. So, but he's not
Gotcha.
currently pulled papers. He's not running for the office.
Mm,
It's just kind of like that's where he's headed because he has a political ambitions and he didn't win the judgeship.
mhm.
So this is going to
And
be a really long conversation with lots of ins and outs, and I don't want to get lost myself, and I'm worried that other people are going to get lost, and I know you're super busy. So can I invite you to come back and to continue this conversation?
absolutely, yeah,
I appreciate that immensely. Thank you so much, and we'll work out the times on that shortly.
perfect. Thank you for having me.